So the Ask Max question for today actually addresses black on black crime. And what it's being compared to is what's happening around the nation with regard to police brutality. And what individuals are inquiring about or curious about is it is it okay, I say okay, but it's viewed differently when you have someone that isn't black taking the life of another black person, than it is when you have black people killing other black people. So to put it bluntly, some people are like, it's okay if you take each other's lives, but as soon as somebody else takes your life, then you have a problem with it. Right?
Yeah. And the way you stated that is perfect, because it's very convoluted with the way that we've been asked that, because you've been asked it one way, I've been asked it one way, and I'm sure other people have heard multiple ways as well. So it's a loaded question regardless of how you look at it.
I believe it is. And from my personal point of view, I think that and I hate to say this is probably a safe answer, but it's safe, and it's my answer though. Like any loss of life on any level, any wrongful loss of life, innocent loss of life on any level, ain't right, isn't fair, shouldn't be happening. So, no, it's not okay if we take each other's lives, and no, it's not, not okay if someone else does. It's just, it is what it is. Nobody should be dying innocently, and at the alarming rate that they are. Chicago is known for, black on black crime. Statistics are high there, but, wrong is wrong everywhere. Now, do I believe it should get more publicity, and should people be up in alarm about it as they are with anything else? Then absolutely I do. But I don't think by any means that blacks are saying that, we look at the loss of life differently when we do it to one another than when somebody else does it to us.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the way that I like it being described is that normally when it's one black person killing another, the system gets a double whammy. They win twice, meaning that they get rid of a black person that they see as a threat to society, and then they also imprison the person who committed the crime. And so then they're getting free labor off of that person. So, and I think that's the God's honest truth about the matter. And so I think that's why people see that injustice, because the person gets incarcerated and a person gets killed, versus if it's a white police officer, or if it's a white security guard, of a housing development. Somehow they even still get off, and they're not even protected by any law.
I agree that people look at the world as a better place when you got one gangbanger killing another.
Right,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I think that's where the discrepancy comes in at, and that's why it gets looked at different and treated differently. And then it upsets me because we as a people, we do generally love each other, and we do take care of each other, and that's something that we know that we have to deal with. And in a rare form, a lot of it is like, because if we're talking about our own community, a lot of it is like how you have your sister or your brother, and there's some wrong things that you do, and there's some conniving things that we do to our kin or our own, so to speak, and just like you pick on a sibling or things like that, and just follow me with the comparison. But when you do it, like, you can justify it and you make up for it, or it's sort of understandable. But then when someone from the outside does it, then you get totally enraged about it, because you better not pick on my brother or my sister. That's my brother or my sister. And so for better or for worse, I feel like that a lot of times that's where the outcry comes from. And I'm definitely not justifying it, but I think that's what happens a lot of times. It's like, when it's happening within our own community, then we look at it like that. It's us. Let us deal with it. You know what I mean? Versus if someone from the outside does it, then that makes us like, oh, like, what are you doing here? Like, you can't do that to us. And then when you put on top of that as well, if it's someone from the outside that has racial tendencies and maybe have a certain past, a certain stigma attached to them, when it comes to our relations, So I think that plays a big part as well. And so I think that's why our Caucasian friends, have to be sensitive to that and understand that when they commit a crime on black people, that has a long history, has many social implications that we have to deal with and that fester, versus when we have internal conflict, within our own communities. And I've never heard any black person justify any crimes of one black person committing on another. It's never been justified. There's been reasons, and usually not good reasons, like whether it's, it could just be a domestic dispute. It could be, gang related. It could be drug related, whatever the case is. Could be an accident for that matter. And so we understand what's going on. And I feel like that we as a community, we normally heal and we normally bond and we try to figure out circumstances and we try to help our young people. Just like in any case in society, there's always going to be exceptions. Always.
Yeah, so. I think the much larger question here, though, is taking steps to stop the violence amongst
right.
Black on blacks.
Right.
I think it starts a lot of different places, but I guess we have to unify. I mean, there has to be some unity. That's certainly part of stopping this what's happened for so long. But I think that's the bigger question here is how to end this problem.
Yeah. So my input for that, and it always gets tricky when you talk about things like this and in this manner, because it's so easy for people to think that you're trying to shift the blame somehow, and I'm definitely not doing that. But there's an empowerment issue, and there's a disparity that has created self-hatred.
Yes.
And I feel like that's the fix, like for us to fix that social status, because we see that all the time. Like we can even take that back to how, like when you had, when slaves were first emancipated, we'll say, not freed, but emancipated. When that first happened, you had poor whites that hated black people because they felt like that they were going to take some of what was theirs, or they were going to get in the way. And really what was happening is that the people in charge, the people in power, were making poor whites think like these African Americans are the enemies. Like that's who you should be mad at. You shouldn't be mad at us, the rich people that's in charge of all this and causing this turmoil, like in your society, and you don't have any resources. Like, don't be mad at us. And so what happens a lot of times is, one that's bad off gets put against another that's bad off. And then what happens beyond that is even the one that knows who's the source of their problem, they can't get at them. You follow what I'm saying? Like, so I think, so in short, what's happening in a lot of communities, because we see it in Hispanic, predominant communities as well, is that we know the source of our problem. Like, we know why our neighborhoods are sometimes abandoned, and there's rundown buildings, and our businesses can't thrive, and police won't come there unless they absolutely have to. Like, we realize what the cause of that is, but again, it's just like the prison system. If you put people of like mind in an environment and in situations where they feel like that they're trapped, they can't get out of it. You're gonna try to get whatever you can, so you're gonna fight each other. And so in short, like that's what I feel like is the solution. Of course, that self-love is first, but then but we have to make systematic changes, and we have to make environmental changes, political changes for that to really come to fruition. Because as long as you feel oppressed, you're gonna fight whoever you can fight. And I've seen it time and time again.
So who do you think is responsible for making those changes, come to fruition? Is it the neighborhoods that are affected by this black on black crime? Is it the leaders of today, if we have any? Is it the Al's or Jesse's, or
Lord.
the numbers are
Lord.
but the numbers are few, and then some people question whether or not they're actual leaders. But whose responsibility is it to make these changes? Does does one do the blood say to the Crips? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, all right, we got to put an end to this, and then who does that? Who does the footwork? Who does the lead work?
Yeah. Well, that has happened a lot, actually, in different cities. Like, you've seen celebrities who used to be affiliated with Bloods or Crips, or may still be, like, they are unified on different levels. And because that whole relation gets misinterpreted as well. Like, there's people on corporate and business and executive levels now who have ties to certain groups and whatnot, and like, but it's not street gang stuff anymore. And you actually see that in actually, like, a lot of clubs and groups and organizations and stuff, where, like, there's different levels of organizing. And sometimes people at certain lower levels don't even understand what's going on up top. And, but people just have this, they may hear a name, and it's a, it may be a hot word that just sets off certain visuals for them, or certain meanings for them, that may not be totally accurate. But so there is a unification that's happening. And that is the answer. Again, that self-love, like, it is at the core. It is the community. It is us coming together and being there for each other and helping each other out. That is the core of it. But at the same time, there has to be those of us who are in positions to help make change and see change through. That's actually changing our social environment, which is in turn our economic environment, and things of that sort, because that really is the cause. Like, the things that we're seeing with crime in our neighborhood and stuff, like, that's the effect. And, like, so you can't medicate it. You know what I mean? That happens so much, where people try to medicate stuff and try to bandage and kind of piece things together. And you're seeing that a lot with, like, in my opinion, with like, when there's tragedies that happen and stuff, people are being retroactive. They weren't proactive. So they would have prayer vigils. They want to rally and march together and say, we're going to stand in unity and all this stuff, but then you're not changing the system. Right. So either you need to be making steps to change the system that then in turn has an impact on making your life better, your situation better. And if you feel like that you can't change it, then that means we need that self-love. We need to inherently and we need to internally be supportive to ourselves and each other.
Do you think that we can be? I hate to get so far off subject. I almost feel like I'm interviewing you, but like, can we be, as blacks, can we be committed to one another enough to create that change?
We can, and we definitely should be. That's my, and I definitely want to hear your opinion on that. Based on your experience and your relationships. But my thing is that, again, like, I keep rolling around in my brain. I keep being reminded of what that cause is. It's like, we're in a situation, and a lot of us are in systems and societies to where we just want to be accepted so bad, and that takes us back to the Martin Malcolm complex and the contrast that a lot of people talk about, because that's sort of the like, we're living sort of the ladder of that. Of the civil rights and whatnot, in which was, you had those who were more the Martin side of, okay, we have to be accepted. We're going to demand that you accept us. And whereas the Malcolm side, to simplify it, is more talking about, like, we are great on our own. Like, we can sustain our own. We can build and have our own. We don't need your society, your construct.
Malcolm didn't mind a little violence.
We can have our own, But hey, right? But and if you listen to some of Dr. King's later speeches, some would say that that was his demise, because he started getting a little more blunt in his speech as well. And so within that, like, that's the argument, is that we can do this, but we are just so used, and we have this mental stigma now, like, that we can't. Like, that's the problem. Like, how do we overcome that? That's the question that I would pose. And again, it's going to take, it's always a dedicated few in everything that happens, but it's going to take that to keep nurturing and then slowly make that change. And people have to believe, like, we have to get back to faith and believe that it's changing. But everybody knows without works, faith is dead. So we gotta be committed to each other. And that's the hardest part, for sure, because we're so used to fighting each other, because we can't, get to the source of our problem, to where we're taking it out on each other. But once we get to that level of commitment that we are going to do this thing, it's it's gonna be beautiful.
Right. I mean, I have a question off of that. I'm going to answer your question too, but in light of everything that's going on, I almost wonder, and I hate to take it the direction of religion, but hey, this is what this show is. We provoke thought here. Like, do you think that what we're seeing and what we're dealing with is you've heard of the end times and things like that, and certain things that have to come to fruition and things like that. So do you think with what's happening in the world today and what we're having to deal with and what we're seeing and things like that, do you think that this is just, it has to be? Do you kind of feel like that?
Let me take a sip of my water. Maxilia Robinson, let me tell you something. My 9-year-old came to me the other day and said, Daddy, I think the world's going to end.
Okay.
And I said, why would you say that? He said, because so many people are killing each other. This is my 9-year-old tells me.
Right, out of the mouth of babes.
Hey, and so, but my response to him was, trying to be a father, trying to be comforting, as well as being honest. I'm always trying to be honest with my children in every aspect. Let them draw their own conclusions, like reasonable human beings should be allowed to do. So my initial response to him was, I've been hearing that my whole life. There's always every generation that says, like this is the worst. These kids nowadays, you always hear that kind of thing. And so, so that's how I broke it down to him. And I said, yeah, there are bad things going on, but also said when you pass away, like when it's your time to die, like that is your world coming to an end. You know what I mean? Like this current world ending, and then you hopefully transition into something better and more beautiful. So I explained it to him that way. So it's hard for me to sit here and say that, that it's biblical proportions of what's going on right now, because I really can look back in history and see how for that time it was also this catastrophic. So my short answer is I really don't buy into people who say, oh, yep, this is it. This has to be it. Because there's always people even break down the numbers to you too, won't they? Like they'll say, oh, like this person's first, middle, and last name had 6 letters in each. That's 666. Oh, that's the beast. That's it. This is it. So hey,
from my perspective, it's very difficult to have an answer for this, because quite honestly, I feel like the future looks bleak. I think that we as African Americans, do we have the ability to unite and make some changes for, our nationality? I think all things are possible. Do I think we will? It's one of those things where I feel like we have to have a leader. Real, like straight up. We have to have a leader. And I think that the path has to be made clear. Like we have to know what it is that we're going for. And it can't be no bull. Like what it is that we're accomplishing and how exactly we're going to do it. And then there has to be a clear vision of the works. Not just, blocking a street, yelling, hell no, we won't go. And then, going home when the police threaten to arrest you. Like, we have to see the work. Now, as far as, and I think that we'll get more African Americans more blacks to rally behind that. But do I think that we can love each other enough to come together on the level that we need to in order to make this change? That's a tough question.
Well, Max, I would say we don't have a choice but to.
Well, we may not have a choice but to, but that doesn't mean
right.
That doesn't necessarily mean that we will.
I got you.
I don't know if we love each other enough. I don't know. Should we? Yeah, but I don't know if we can come together enough for something like that.
Yeah,
especially
valid point.
another thing is that when you have blacks that are, you know, trying to support something that hasn't necessarily affected them, then they're gonna feel a little bit differently about it. You know, they're not sold out. You know what I mean? So, like, are we gonna can we get enough momentum behind this to actually make that change? I don't know. I mean, stay tuned. You know what I'm saying? I don't by no means intend to sound hopeless. You know,
No, I got you.
I'm hopeful that this thing will change. I'm hopeful that we can unite. I'm hopeful that we can come together. We can be one people. We can love each other and all these things as such. But, you know, based on what I see day to day, you know, we can't even get along in our own neighborhoods,
right.
You know.
And the reason I say that is just to implicate the severity of it, of that we have to.
And I don't know if the people that aren't affected by it, you know, realize that enough to actually come together and say, all differences aside, your life is important to me, you know, my life is important to you. Let's band together and do what we have to do to actually, you know, make something happen.
Yeah.
You know.
And my brain's going so many directions on this because I think back to even teachings of Marcus Garvey talking about how important it was to remember your inherent nationality and, you know, and the pride of your race, to really understand who you are and to understand like how you work, you know, as a people. But before you can be a part of anybody else's society, you got to have that knowledge of self, which is so important. So it makes me think of that. And then like with the leader part, like no leader, I guess I should say, usually leaders aren't recognized for their full greatness until after they're gone. And then history books, you'd be like, oh, wow, that person must have really been great. But during that time, there's always haters. You follow what I'm saying? And so I feel like that we need to start appreciating each other more. For one, we need to look in the mirror first to find our number one, you know, leader, as far as, you know, as far as that throughout the day, knowing that like we got to pick ourselves up a lot of the times.
Yeah.
You know, we got to have that self-determination. You know, of course, you know, you have to have that spirituality about you, whatever that represents to you as a person. You know, having that faith in God. You know, to know that He lives in us to carry us through and to give us that strength. But then I feel like that there are brilliant people. There's great people doing great things, but we need to support them because we have what we need. We really do have great leadership, I feel, but I feel like that we have to be supportive.
Out of who?
That's the issue. Oh, I see it on many levels. Like to me, like whether you look locally and you just see people who are in charge of different community organizations that's providing services to different neighborhoods, or, you know, it could even be on, you know, like even people on a political level, like, you know, that may be organizing or maybe politicians. And then definitely on a national level, we've been seeing so many people here recently that's given these great speeches and that's going around being the voice. Because if we're talking about leaders, then we're talking about people who can, you know, who pretty much a leader is someone who has that vision, who has the ability to inspire people with their vision. And so me personally, I'm seeing that all over the place.
Yeah,
it's just a matter of us
you have
being
to be
supportive.
willing to walk that thing out too. Like you can't just inspire, you know, incite a couple
Absolutely.
of hoorahs and then go on about your business. Like you got to be able to face whatever that monster is up front, you know, close and personal, you know, grab it in the collar and really address it. But there has to be some work behind that too.
You're absolutely right. And out of all that I've seen recently, it's one in particular that I can point out is with Jesse Williams. Like I've seen where there's been millionaires, there's been celebrities that's been banding together, getting together, coming up with action plans. Like, okay, so what are we going to do? Like, how are we going to affect this change? And so he's one that I can say that didn't just get on TV and just run his mouth. And he's always at the protests and the rallies, having people's backs. And so, but he follows through with it, and he's, you know, he's actually trying to create some change, not just out there showing his face to say, hey, look at me, guess who it is, I showed up. You know, actually following through with some action, which is the most important part.
Right. And the protest, the fact that you just mentioned the protest, that's interesting too, because what I've heard or read is that some people are the protests have made some people nervous. There's still been there've been people arrested, there's been more shootings, there's been more violence, things like that. And so some people are kind of backing away from the protest, whereas before they were like, heck yeah, let's get out there and do this. But now they're like, I don't want nobody else shot, I don't want people being arrested. So maybe we can just figure out a way to like cope with this thing, or not ruffle as many feathers as necessary, and kind of ease back off of this protest idea. It sounded good, but then, once you get out there and really in the thick of it, it's not as enticing, What do you think about that?
Well, to those people, I would say, sorry, I'm not sorry. because what else? Because that just sounds like that you're ready for complacency again.
Right.
Like you're saying, just, and so let me take a step back real quick and say that I'm one of those people too. Like, they get tired of, that logs out of Facebook at certain points because you see so much rhetoric and hear so much rhetoric, by keyboard gangsters, as I like to call them. People who the people who will say a lot on the keyboard, but then when it comes to some follow through, nowhere to be found. But constantly complaining though, for sure. And so that's why I say sorry, not sorry to that, because people have to stay aware. Because what that means is you want people to start talking about the Kardashians again. You don't want people talking about real life issues that actually plays a part in their well-being,
right,
and their family's well-being. That's what I get out of that. Take the police chief. I don't want to get him confused, but because it was either the Dallas one or the gentleman in Missouri, but it was a black police chief, and he made the comment about he said, get out of the picket lines and actually do something, because we're hiring. He said, so get out of the picket lines and stop being part of the problem. And stop the protesting and all that kind of thing, and actually come work on our police force. I understand what the brother was trying to get at, and I really understand his point. But I think that that's not the way to go about it. I feel like that's a cop-out. I feel like that is to say that any profession that I have an issue with, like that I want to see a change in, and me as a citizen, and if you're a public servant, as a citizen, I have the right to then protest it. I have the right to petition it. I have the right to try to get you removed if you're not doing your job correctly, if my tax dollars is helping support your job. And so nobody goes to their doctor, Max, like think about the last time you went to the dentist. If you got a wisdom tooth pulled and you had an infection, then does that mean that you got to go to dental school? Is that you follow what I'm saying?
Right.
I mean, so like with any profession, just because the majority says that like they're unsatisfied with the way that you're conducting business, they have a right to speak out on that. And I think the wrong response is for you to then reply, well, stop, protesting, because that's part of the problem. That's not part of the problem.
Right.
The problem is we need to come up with solutions on how we're better police, about how our neighborhoods are better protected and served.
I mean, I certainly don't think that people should step away from the protest. I think that it's kind of I guess if you could call it like ground zero. It's where the action starts, to make that movement towards change. So I think that a week or so ago we had Razor on, and he said in terms of people losing their lives in this whole ordeal of police brutality, he said, unfortunately, some people have to die. And in this particular situation, whatever is deterring people from protesting, being arrested, or being handled aggressively or whatnot, unfortunately, some people have to be arrested. It has to run the course that it needs to run in order to create change.
It's hard,
change
but it's
isn't
true.
Easy.
Yeah.
Change isn't easy. So you can't expect to walk out there with a slice of pie and make everything okay. No, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be tough, and you're going to be subjected to some things that aren't so comfortable and you may not want to be. But But in order to bring about the change that you claim you want, then you have to be willing to go through what it takes to go through, which is, the people of the civil rights era and Martin and all that rallied around him. You have to, I think in these times, you can get a better appreciation for what those people did, right? Because you understand that a little bit better, that it wasn't easy, going through what they went through. And they went through much harsher things, when they protested, dogs and fire hoses and, big billy clubs and different things like that. But you get a new appreciation for what they went through in order to bring about their change. And, if they were willing to go through it so that, me, and the third can have a better life, then, we ought to be willing to give of ourselves so that our children and our children's children are better to, can have a better life. But I certainly don't think that now is the time to say, more than what I bargained for, let me step away from this. I don't think that it's time for that. And I think that, that's a tactic. That's what people want you to think and to feel is, handle it a certain way. And a lot of people will turn away simply because of that. But, it's not, this struggle isn't for the faint in heart. You know what I mean? You have to be willing, you have to be sold out for the cause in order to deal with what may come along with it. But
because I hear you stating casualties. There's different levels of casualty. A lot of people think casualties of war is only death. But sometimes you got to die to different things.
Right.
You know what I mean? But that takes a level of commitment, which we've talked about. In order for us to change this thing, there's things we got to commit to. And I don't want to hear people talking about that we're just here talking and they're hearing a lot of talk all over the place, because there's action. There's solution-based action planning going on, guarantee it. And I know that you've seen it, and there's a lot of people probably just ignored it. But because we don't want to commit, that's the hardest part. We got to commit to being a casualty to some things, meaning maybe you got to stop. Because if we're talking about, the boycotting piece, maybe that means you can't buy that certain brand anymore that you want to buy because the owner of that company supports certain politics that's hurting you and your community. Those are the kind of commitments that we got to deal with, straight up. You know what I mean? Because you may remember, I remember like how Hilfiger and then the alcohol brand Cristal, like both of those owners came out and made some racist comments.
Well, let me tell you what I remember. I remember Jay-Z's lyrics talking about I used to drink Cristal,
right.
but racist. That's what I.
There you go.
That's where my literature came from.
Yeah. So, but here's the thing though, because that got glamorized, right? But there's a lot of things. There's a lot of smaller, low key things that we need to start glamorizing, to be able to draw attention to them and say, hey, this is something we got to change. But that's the thing though. It's like, unfortunately, there's always going to be casualties on different levels. We got to start commit. We got to commit to the sacrifice. That's the action. When somebody says, what are we going to do? That's number one right there. Are you and your family self-sustainable?
Right.
You know what I mean? And then, of course, that branches out into us as, as a community. And then, of course, wider spread as a nation. Like, are we doing sustainable things, to carry on? Yes, change is hard. And yes, that casualty does then ramp up to when there's resistance, there's going to be people hurt and, unfortunately, people losing lives. I mean, that's part of change when you're going up against a force that doesn't want that change. But here's the thing, though. The only reason it has to be those casualties of life at times is because you are doing it for their well-being. Either lives are going to get lost while that change is coming to fruition, or lives are going to keep continuing being lost, every month.
Right.
Every month you're going to see a new news story. So either way, there's going to be casualties from something. So we have to make the commitment on what are we going to sacrifice for our children to have, and matter of fact, not even children, for us to be better off. I heard the statement about it's hard to tell somebody with a master and a doctorate, like that you gotta like a sacrifice of things, like you got to put your job on the line, in order for the nation to heal, like in order for this child to, to have the best future that they can have, like you may have to sacrifice some of the things that you worked very hard for, and you can imagine that could be a hard choice to make.
And that's what goes back to what I was saying about this whole unity thing, is that it's tough to see us coming together as we should, because there's so many things that affect you individually if you come together. That with what the scenario that you just now described, like we're in a world where it's, you know, it's been how do I say this? Can't think of the word I want to use. Cut this out. But you know, we're in a world where it's structured where, you know, you look out for number one, and so if I have that master's or that doctorate, and I'm making however much per year and things like that, you want me to put all that to the side in order to help your cause, you know?
Yeah.
That may not necessarily be affecting me. That's why I said it's going to be tough for a lot of people to make that decision, you know, and a lot of people, you know, they don't justify what may be happening in and around the world, especially when they're not directly affected by it. You know, then it's not so bad, or it's over there, or it's slowed down, or you know, different.
Until it hits their front door.
He had a gun or something like that, you know. So.
Yep, until it hits their front door, just like we saw with like the Sandy Hook shooting, or how like certain drugs used to be confined to certain demographic of kids, but then when you see other kids from other neighborhoods starting to get their hands on the same thing and being affected by the same thing, then we're having you know, meetings. Then everybody's coming together trying to figure out like, how are we going to fix this problem? You know, so that's always how it is. But then when it comes to us as a people, though, I think of that term "new slaves." That term "new slaves" because what you just said, Max, about the, you know, if the person is sort of well-to-do, sees that things aren't quite right, but they're too comfortable to do things about it. That's new slave. Like doesn't that remind you of the house Negro versus the field Negro?
I follow you. I got you.
You know, it's like, oh, master take care of me. I don't know what y'all talking about. But they talking about, in my humble opinion, I'm up in the house. I feel good up in here. So hey,
so
if the shoe fits,
right. We answered the Ask Max and then some more.
Don't worry, I'll edit it.
So you're listening to In My Humble Opinion with Maxillia Robinson and Charles Lewis, and hope you've enjoyed that Ask Max on black crime, and we'll be right back.